this is what's called the use of force continuum. This is what cops are trained on about how much force they're allowed to use against us. A cop showing up at your protest in uniform is a use of force. That's the lowest level of force, is mere presence. Just having a cop there is a form of force. At the other end of the spectrum is what's called deadly force. A cop is only allowed to use deadly force if they believe there is a serious threat of physical injury or death to either the cop or to another person. Between those two areas is this continuum. Things like static resistance. The cop says, put your hands behind your back, and you don't. You lock them down like this. That now allows the cops to use hands-on compliance tactics, which can also be things called pain compliance tactics, where they bend your thumb back in order to get you to do, or they press on a part in your neck. So if you're watching cops manhandling humans, watch what they're doing with their hands and what they're using. Is it a baton? Is it a taser? Is it mace? Is it tear gas? All of those things are important for me to analyze whether or not a cop is using excessive force or unlawful force, or what's also called police brutality. All of those terms mean that the cop used more force than necessary to do his job. Cops are the one profession that have the legal authority to murder humans. But with that power comes incredible responsibility as well. A cop is only allowed to use the amount of force reasonably necessary to deal with the situation at hand. Obstructing police activities, whether it's with vehicles or on person, whether it's an ambulance or a cop car, if you are distracting the cop to the point that they can't do their job, they can potentially arrest you for obstructing police activities. That can also mean yelling at them, engaging in debate with them, etc., etc. So, security culture is basically a term that is meant to describe how political activists attempt to keep themselves and their political movements safer from the state and corporations that they oppose. It is basically a set of customs and norms shared by a community who are under threat, who risk arrest or other types of targeting. The central principle for security culture is that you should act on a need-to-know basis. Or, in other words, don't ask, don't tell. And what this means, and why this is important is if I walk up to you and, say, next Thursday, I'm going to commit a felony. You're now a conspirator, potentially, in my crime. But more importantly, if they come after me and start investigating me, you are now potentially subject to a grand jury subpoena, for instance. You could be contacted by the cops to give information up about me or the movement that we're a part of. And so you should never place anyone else in a vulnerable situation with regard to your own actions. And the same is true for other people. Like somebody that walks up to you and is like, I broke the law last night. That person is potentially showing poor judgment, but they also could potentially be intentionally setting you up as well. So act to know on a need-to-know basis. Other forms of security culture include, recognize that you can always say no to any action at any time. If you get a bad feeling about something or you have a second thought, you can always back away from that commitment to be able to, come back another day. I can't tell you how many times I have had to represent people who have said after the fact, I got this feeling that something was wrong, but we decided to do it anyway, and then, very bad consequences happened. Don't be a tattletale, is another way of saying don't be an informant, don't be a snitch, don't talk about things that should not be talked about publicly, and especially be careful about public statements that you make, whether it's in a setting like this, whether it's to the media, or whether it's typing it up on FaceCrack. Meetings. Not every meeting needs to be high security, but there could be meetings where you might want the location to be secure. If you hold your meetings in the same place every single week, it would be very easy for someone to set up some audio recording capacity to record your meetings, whether that is a corporation or the cops. Especially these days, it could be either. So moving the location around, having it in a private home, et cetera, can be important. Maybe you want everybody at this particular meeting to be vouched for, meaning, they've been vetted. Like 2 other people know this person, know them not to be a cop, know them not to be a private security goon. And be careful of what is said in a meeting. If it's supposed to be a public meeting, don't stand up and say, next Thursday we're all going to go get arrested. Because now everybody at that meeting has been subjected to that information, and some of them may not have wanted to be, subjected to that. So consent is really important. And remember, there can be different levels of security for different types of meetings and different discussions. Now, a grand jury is a very common tool of repression by the state. A grand jury is used for all felonies, whether it's a drug crime or a political crime. It's the way indictments are issued to start all felony cases. But when a political movement is targeted with a grand jury, very often people who are viewed as leaders or media spokespeople who have done nothing illegal could be subpoenaed to a grand jury. This means that they must now go in front of a U.S. attorney and snitch out their movement and other people. Their choices are to either snitch the movement out or go to jail for contempt of court, up to 6 months. It is a horrible, hardcore, situation to deal with. The U.S. attorney, a U.S. marshal or an FBI agent shows up at my house and thrusts a subpoena on me. The subpoena is going to be requiring me to go snitch out my comrades or go to jail. If this happens to you or anyone in your community, contact us. We do a 1-hour training on grand juries. There's a lot of stuff to grand juries. But the important thing to know is that, grand juries are often used as witch hunts. They are often used when a movement is being really successful and a campaign is being successful. This is a surefire way to mess that up, to throw a wrench into the works, to make people paranoid, and to divert your attention. If your campaign is going real well and all of a sudden somebody's going to go to jail for contempt, refusing to testify to a grand jury, now instead of fighting the man, everybody is working on the grand jury and doing prisoner support and stuff like that. So when a grand jury comes to town, the most effective thing that the movement can do is redouble its efforts to resist that. Redouble the amount of protests you're doing, redouble the effectiveness of whatever it is that you're fighting about. Because if the state or corporation realizes that what they did was successful, what they did was effective, you can make sure that they're going to do it again and again and again. So one of the most important ways to fight against government repression is by making sure that they don't recognize that what they're doing is effective against us. An infiltrator is a person who comes to your community and enters your group with bad intent. They're there to spy on you. They're there, to cause trouble. This can be either someone from a corporation or from the state. There is almost, let me finish. An informant is one of our own that gets into trouble and turns on us and starts giving information to the state in order to get out of trouble or to reduce their prison sentence or whatever it may be. A provocateur is normally an outsider that's sent into your community in order to up the ante. They're the guy that's going to stand up and be like, let's go burn it down, when you've never talked about that and that's not a tactic you're interested in. The idea of a provocateur is to make it so that you become a target of the state. Provocateurs are very dangerous, especially if you have younger activists in your midst. A provocateur shows up and starts poking around and is like, hey, you want to go commit some arsons? Hey, should we make some Molotov cocktails? All of a sudden you've got, a 19-year-old who thinks that might sound good. They go off and commit a crime with this person, and then, they're indicted, prosecuted, go to prison for a long time. We generally have this general rule, like if someone does something inappropriate that is provocateurish, one time you educate them. One time you take them aside and you tell them that's not appropriate in these public meetings. If you do that again, we're going to have to ask you to leave. If they do it a second time, then it's intentional. The first time, maybe it's lack of information, maybe it's poor judgment. A second time is where they should be viewed as a problem child. And believe it or not, as sensitive as we are to being inclusive to everyone in our movements, if someone is there to cause harm, trouble, problems, you do have the right to tell them that maybe they should find a different hobby or a different group to work with. We are not required to take all, regardless of their intent, the fact that they do nothing but cause drama and, foment divisions among your group. You do have the right to say, we might be more effective without you in our organizing community, potentially. Because, the reality is that there's no way to know for sure whether somebody is a snitch or just someone with poor judgment. Groups call me all the time and are like, we think so-and-so is a snitch. Can you help us prove it? No. Usually there is very little way that I can say with certainty that someone is a snitch or not. The only way is if we get FOIA documents, or they are named in discovery, or they out themselves inadvertently. And you want to be really careful about snitch jacketing someone, about accusing someone of being a snitch. Because you know what? The feds do that. The state will pick out your effective leader and say, hey, Lauren, I think Lauren's a snitch. Someone accuses me of that, I get pissed, I leave the group, I leave the city, I stop organizing with you, and the person who accused me was an FBI agent, doing it intentionally. So that is historically, tactics that the state has used, and we just need to be, really aware of it. If someone is a problem, ask them to leave. Don't let one person run your bank accounts and your websites and everything that you need to be effective. If they end up being a problem, they take all of that and run. We've had informants that have robbed organizations' bank accounts. We've had informants that have reported back to the FBI for years about what groups are doing. We've had informants date activists, do drugs with them, commit crimes with them, make out with them. In the U.S., FBI agents aren't allowed to have sex with you, but corporate spies can and will. So just because someone goes out and commits a felony with you doesn't mean that they've proved themselves to not be a snitch, a provocateur, an FBI agent, a corporate private security person. So good security culture should make it almost irrelevant whether that person is infiltrating you or not. If you're using good security culture, you're not bragging, you're not gossiping, you're not, doing stupid things in public meetings, then, you are creating a culture that will make it very, very difficult for them to destroy you. Security culture also has bad behaviors like dominating meeting time, asking a bunch of really personal questions about everyone, pressuring people to do things they don't want to do, or upping the ante or upping the tactics, and disregard for others' safety. Meaning we all decide we're going to go to the federal building and hold a banner. Well, we get there and one of our own launches a Molotov toward the cops, putting all of us in severe risk. That person, is obviously someone that we should not be organizing with in the future. And that's, of course, an extreme example. There are a lot of infiltrators and snitches that move from one community to the other. So they go from Portland Rising Tide to the Buffalo Field campaign to, the Seminole Earth First campaign. And they move around. And so this website tries its best to keep track of known infiltrators, snitches, informants, etc., including photographs. It is in no way complete at all. So private spies, corporate spies, are also called gray intelligence. Most corporations big corporations that are involved with climate, coal, oil and gas, Monsanto, all of these major corporations will now have a separate entity that is their security and their PR, their media. And the security and PR people work together so that they will come and spy on you and then create a terrorist bulletin to share with others about what bad people you are. This document that you can't really see, we got through the Freedom of Information Act. And Themis is one of these gray intelligence agencies. Themis was hired by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, huge organization, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to spy on a group called U.S. Chamber Watch. This was just a group that was tracking the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they had a website where they were reporting on it. In this document, this private spy agency investigated the U.S. Chamber Watch. They said, U.S. Chamber Watch is well connected politically, evidenced by the established relationship between them and Andy Stern and powerful D.C. operatives. And then it goes on to lay out what their plan is for trying to destroy this above-ground group. They say things like, we're going to plant 2 spies. One is going to out the other one, thus legitimizing the second one. One is going to leak a document to the activists, claiming it's a real document. And then when they go to the media and say, look at this document, we're going to say, those liars, that's a fake document. Here's the real document. They can't be trusted. They also say in here that they're going to do smear pieces on the leaders and organizers. All of this being done against an above-ground group that was barely being effective. All they're doing is monitoring the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And millions of dollars were spent on this spy agency with this complicated plan. So TransCanada, which was responsible for the Keystone XL pipeline, they are a tar sands corporation, they put together a whole PowerPoint. And long before the Keystone pipeline was even a thought in any of our minds, they were traveling along the pipeline route, going to FBI offices, police departments, and district attorneys' offices, doing a PowerPoint presentation saying, the eco-terrorists are coming, and here's what they're going to do, and here are their tactics. Here's a sleeping dragon. This is what it is. This is how to extricate them when they lock down to these things. Oh, and by the way, here's a crime that Texas could use to prosecute them. Oh, and by the way, here's a photo and a description of the 3 people we want you to target first. Here's the 3 main organizers that might be coming to your town that we hate and that we would like you to arrest and prosecute as soon as possible. Oh, and by the way, district attorneys, there's all these terrorism crimes at the state and federal level that we think you should charge these people with, all being put out by a corporation, a multinational corporation. And TransCanada is not the only one that does this type of stuff. And again, their mistake, the reason I got my hands on this, is once they shared it with law enforcement, then it becomes subject to public records laws. The power of FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and your state public records laws should not be underestimated. By requesting this stuff on a regular basis, you too might get stuff like this out, which helps us learn how they are spying on us and how they are targeting us. And of course, the idea of a corporation telling the U.S. Attorney's Office what to do when nonviolent protesters come to town is outrageous, and certainly shows the confluence, the conflation between private corporations and the state. They are one now. And just to show you, with the FBI, right now, most of the head honchos of these private security groups are ex-FBI. They go from working for the government out to the private sector, make millions of dollars, go back to the FBI so they get access to those computers and all of that information, and then go back out to the private sector where they make big bucks again and again and again. You have no rights at airports. If you were to read the small print on your airline ticket, it says you've got no rights. They can search your stuff, they can, and not just like your bags once you get to TSA, once you get into the airport parking lot, they're allowed to search you and all sorts of things like that. However, the pilot cannot refuse to fly a passenger based on like political beliefs and stuff like that. So, we had a woman who wore a t-shirt that in Arabic said, "Peace be with you," but the captain refused to let her fly on the plane because they thought that the Arabic was terrorism related. So we sued the airplane, and she didn't get to fly that day, but she got more than enough free money for flights in the future. ICE can never enter someone's home without consent, without the person letting them in. They are not allowed to bust down the doors. The other thing I'll just tell you in solidarity is, right now, if someone is picked up on a deportation arrest, it takes about 18 months for them to be processed through the immigration system before they are returned to their country of origin. After 6 months of being in custody, the state is allowed to terminate their parental rights and legally put their children up for adoption or funnel them into the foster care system after 6 months of in custody. The only way to avoid this is for the parents to fill out what's called a guardianship authorization that basically says, in the event that I am picked up on an immigration hold, I give Ryan, as a U.S. citizen, permission to go get my kids. So he goes and gets the kids out of ICE jail, and then he and I have made arrangements. He's going to bring the kids across the street to my undocumented sister, and she'll raise them. Or he's going to put them on a plane and fly them to grandma, in Guadalajara or whatever. The idea is to not let the state make those kinds of decisions for undocumented parents, and nor do we want those children in the system. 80% of California prison inmates right now were in the foster care system. 80% of all California inmates were former foster children. It is an extremely broken system. SLAPP suits. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. This is where corporations sue activists and organizations in order to try and shut them down. We currently have 2 SLAPP suits going on right now. One is where Energy Transfer Partners, DAPL, has sued a bunch of groups for talking naughty about them. Literally, they have filed a civil lawsuit for defamation, saying that we knowingly gave false information about them being earth raper, destroyer, asswipes, and they are now trying to sue these activists and organizations for millions of dollars in civil court. So no jail, but you get wrangled into the legal system. A SLAPP suit, if a SLAPP suit, you have to be served a copy of the lawsuit, because it's a civil lawsuit, and then you only have 30 days to respond once you've been served. So if this ever happens to you, contact us right away. We'll help you get lawyers. We'll help you, know what the next steps are. There are many, many states, including Oregon, that have anti-SLAPP laws. This says, when the corporation is falsely and frivolously suing you to try to suck up your time and energy, there is a fast-track process for you to get out of the case. And if you are successful, then the corporation has to pay all of your attorney fees and costs for the inconvenience that they have caused you. Now, the reason that SLAPP suits are taken very seriously, and the reason that we fight them as soon as possible, is because one of the things these corporations want is discovery. They want to know your membership lists. They want to know where you get your money. They want to look at all your emails so that they can poke holes into your world and better know how to destroy you in the future. And so we get these cases thrown out before it ever gets to the discovery time period. The other lawsuit that we are currently involved in is a Canadian boreal logging company called Resolute sued a bunch of environmental groups that had a campaign to stop logging in the Canadian boreal forest. In both of those cases that I mentioned, both the DAPL one and Resolute, the law firms that filed both of them are the same law firms that represent Donald Trump. Both cases were filed by the same law firm. And in the Resolute case, we filed a motion to dismiss that the judge just recently granted and threw the case out, but now has given them leave to refile it. But we do not want them to have a second of discovery. Once discovery is cracked open, then we're in kind of a serious oh shit moment, which is why most activists are not going to sue the corporation for defamation, because it's reciprocal discovery. We get to discover on their end, they get to discover on their end, and we don't want them to have any of our private information for their purposes. So it's you're in a vulnerable situation if you file for defamation. We would rather advise people to fight defamation in the court of public opinion. Do media, do outreach, organize, do all the usual things to call them out as liars and prove that they're liars. The legal system is not a perfect system, and it puts activists in a vulnerable position, and it sucks energy, resources, money out of your activism. So if you are organizing, be prepared. What do you need in order to pull off a successful action? One of the number one things that I find is missing from most action planning is your exit plan. You plan all the details of what you're going to do and who's going to speak when and who's bringing the cookies and who has the signs, but you don't plan how you're going to leave and how you're going to get all of your people home safely. And the number one time period that individuals are targeted by the state is when you get into your private vehicle and you all leave in different directions. So make sure you have solid plans and that you're prepared for all sorts of contingencies that might happen. Legal observers are people who have been trained to witness cops. They are only there to witness the actions of police, either police misconduct or the arrest of activists. And they agree to be a witness for you, either in your criminal case or your police brutality case. Police liaisons are the person who is chosen by your group or by your movement to be the negotiator between protesters and cops. the police liaison should be really the only person talking to the cops at a protest. They have been authorized by the community, and they are given very specific marching orders. A police liaison doesn't get to make it up as they go. It's the movement's job to tell them what the parameters are. We'll do this if this happens. We won't do this if this happens. You know, and police liaison has to go back and forth between the people, but they're not there to make the job of the cops easier. You know, it's not your job as police liaison to go back and say, well, you're all going to have to leave now or they're going to arrest you. You know, like, that's not a police liaison's job. You know, your job is to say, well, they only want to be here for 6 hours, you know, why don't you go have a donut and let them exercise their First Amendment rights, and, you know, we'll all be good here. Or if someone has locked down, or if someone, you know, is in a high-stakes situation, maybe you are trying to negotiate lawyers to be able to go witness that person. Maybe you're trying to negotiate people to be able to come down from the blockade and leave without arrest. You know, there can be all sorts of things that you might be doing, but you don't get to make it up yourself. You know, you don't get to think for yourself. You're supposed to be, you know, taking direction from the movement, and this person really needs to know their rights. I've been probably arrested half a dozen times as the police liaison, get myself out of jail. You know, I wasn't prosecuted, but as the go-between, you are often targeted by the cops. So you want to make sure that you know your rights and you can talk on your feet pretty well. Support person is basically the person who often is at home sitting by the phone, and if you have a health issue or you were unexpectedly arrested and your dog is, you know, locked in the house, this is the person you call in order to get assistance from jail. Oftentimes you need to have a landline because sometimes jails will not allow collect calls. And just because you got arrested as you planned doesn't mean you need to call the jail support person. And this is that phone number that you might want to write on your arm or your leg. Don't take anything to a protest that you don't want the cops to have, whether that's drugs, weapons, love notes, you know, you name it. And make sure that you are prepared for the situation you are going to. Don't expect me to provide you with water, food, slippers, a pen, a pencil, a sign. You know, come as an adult. Take yourself seriously. You know, we're not here to party in a parking lot. We're here to fight the state. And if we're actually going to take ourselves seriously as activists, we need to start treating ourselves in a more serious way. And then, of course, protect your digital devices. Make sure they're password protected, or don't bring them at all.